and welcome to the McLean Chronicles. My name is Ross McLean. I bring you the stories that others don't talk about and help you to see behind the curtain as to what's actually going on in the world today. But today, I'm going to tell you the story about a police dog named Bingo. B-I-N-G-O, and Bingo was his name. Last Tuesday, Bingo was killed in the line of duty, working for the Toronto Police Department, while trying to effect the arrest of a person wanted on a warrant for murder. This dog gave his life in the line of duty. I want to tell you about how special police dogs are, what they mean to the cops and how they're used, and go just a little bit deeper on the subject as to why this hit members of the police department and police departments across probably North America as they heard about it, hit them hard when they learned about the death of this dog, Bingo. It was Tuesday, the 25th of July, 2023, when the Toronto police went to go execute a warrant for somebody, a warrant for murder. Someone who had shot and killed someone before, a man who was wanted for it, in the area of Dixon and Kipling Roads in Toronto. Now that's an area that's known. It's just known for all the crime, and it's probably one of the worst parts of the city, even though it's cleaned up in the last little while. But the police were ready when they went in for this one. Serving the warrant was members of the emergency task force, and they brought along as part of their crew in serving the warrant Sergeant Smith and his dog Bingo, the canine Bingo. Maybe they thought that this guy might have been a squirter, someone who was going to run when they went to go get him, or the dog might have been handy, looking for some materials in the house or the apartment where they were going for him. Now, my understanding is this, and I'm going to talk in generalities about this from people that I talked to get some of this information. My understanding is the police went to go serve the warrant. And as they did, the person they were looking for took off and ran. Ran and hid. Ran around a corner, hid behind some material, and then was going to shoot the first thing that came around that corner, apparently. We'll wait to see what the investigation reveals. That first thing around that corner was police service dog Bingo. Fearless, he came around the corner, and the dog was shot. We don't know how many times this dog was shot as he came around the corner. The police officers that were behind obviously heard this and saw this, and they knew how to take that corner themselves a little bit better, and they were able to then apprehend and arrest the suspect. The suspect was brought in, but their partner Bingo apparently was fatally and viciously wounded from however many shots it was he would have taken. My understanding is that the dog was in fairly excruciating pain, and the police that were there, as well as his handler, they had to deal with this. His handler, Sergeant Brandon Smith, looked down and saw this dog that he's been training with for about a year or so at this point, who he's had. He sees him lying there in pain and wounded, doing what the dog is meant to do. Assist the police, capture the bad guys, and I'll talk about this a little bit, be a less than lethal weapon, really. The dogs are a less than lethal weapon for dealing with problems like this. Now, the police are very, very bothered by this course of events with this dog being shot. And why is that? People don't get it who maybe don't understand police work. Some people do who have their own dogs. They understand what it must be like to lose a dog. That people have lost them before. But look, this is what bad guys do. And it's happened before in the past to a Toronto cop. When they're being chased by the police, off they go, around a corner they go, and then they set up with a gun pointed back, waiting for the officer to come around the corner unexpectedly, and they fill him full of bullets. They murdered one cop that way many years ago in Toronto, Todd Bayless. That's how he got killed. They went around a corner too quickly. So in this case, had it been an officer that was first around the corner after this guy, it just might have been another police officer that we were burying and having another funeral for and another memorial. And up in this neck of the woods, up in Toronto and in Canada, in like the last year or so, we've had over 10 police officers killed. Shot, run over, everything. It's just been, the number of officers killed has just been ridiculous in the last little while. So here's this beautiful police dog, took a bullet, saved his partner. I have to ask you, what do you think that must be like, looking down at your partner, this dog that you love, you spent all this time training with, and seeing him there in excruciating pain while he was doing his work? I don't know that there could be much more heart-wrenching things to do than that for a police officer. Most people aren't really aware about some of the trauma and the PTSD that hits coppers when they're involved in either taking a life or seeing a life being taken, or just the stresses of the job. I remember one officer, way back when I was on the job, we had a bunch of funerals, police funerals going on in that period of time too. There must have been 5, 6, or 7 police officers that we buried in a short period of time who were killed in the line of duty. And each time that the story came out, the report came out of an officer killed in the line of duty, this one copper that I knew on our shift, he just disappeared for like 3 weeks. And I remember saying, I talked to some of the guys who knew him a lot longer, and I'd say, hey, where's so-and-so? Like, what's up with him? Oh man, he's taken some time off. I said, well, what's the story there? And apparently when he was quite young and on the job, another police officer was murdered right in his presence beside him. And every time a copper would get killed in the line of duty, all the PTSD just came raining back down on this man's soul. And he would go off and just hide and do whatever he could to try and deal with the pain of it until he felt well enough to come back. And nobody ever bothered him for it. He didn't get charged the time off for it, I don't believe, because everybody understood, the scar and the cross that this man was bearing on his soul when this happened. He saw that. You have this police dog go down. It's emotional. They're like partners to these police officers. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. I talked to some coppers I know. I'm reminded of another story of another police officer. He was out. There was a chase going on across the city. And, everybody heard the chase going on. They sort of had an idea where it was going to end up downtown. Roadblocks were set up, if you will. Spike strips were put out. And along comes racing the car that's been chased all over the city. And this one police officer, he did what he had to do. He saw the car was going to be driving right over another cop because this guy wasn't stopping for anybody. So he fired the shotgun that he had, and he killed and stopped the driver. But this copper, he was never right after that. He just couldn't deal with the fact that even though it was a righteous, honorable shooting, it's what he had to do to save lives. He did the right thing. He could never cope with it. And he ended up taking his life. a few years later. Nothing could help him with the stress of dealing with the trauma of having to take someone else's life. And I think in that one particular case, the police division where he came from, I think they named the police dog after that officer, I believe. I have to go back to look into the details about that. But what I'm getting at is I don't think people appreciate what it is that the cops were feeling when this dog died. You know, I went on YouTube and I found some other cases down in the States. I posted them on my Twitter, where other police dogs have died in the line of duty. And they give those dogs, in many cases, full police funerals and memorials. I mean, they all come out for them. You know, I hear some people think, maybe that's overkill, maybe. But you know what? It's not. In my opinion, it absolutely is not overkill. Police dogs. I'm always amazed when I hear the stories about what some of these dogs do, their abilities and how they do things. And I often wonder, I never really worked with police dogs, so I talked to some coppers that I know and asked them, how do they feel about police dogs? Like, what's the value? What do they see in the police dogs? And it's interesting. They said the dog is really, it's like another piece of equipment when you're out there, when you're working. We're talking about you're not the dog handler. You're a copper. You're doing a call. You're handling something. And you're doing something, and all of a sudden the police dog shows up on the scene. You know you've got another piece of equipment that you could use in a variety of ways to resolve the problem or the investigation or whatever it is you're dealing with at that time. You know, I can imagine myself, the one thing that, you know, most people want to do when they're cops, for the most part, you want to catch bad guys. That's part of what you want to do. And I can just imagine rolling up onto a scene. You get called for, let's say, a break and enter, and someone's gotten in and they've gotten into the bedroom and they've molested a child and they've just taken off and they're gone, but they've been gone for 5 minutes by the time that you get there. And you're dealing with the parents and you're looking at the child and you're gathering the information, you're putting out descriptions. And you're thinking, man, I hope we can get this guy or whoever did this. Then up rolls the canine unit. And you see the handler get out with that dog. Dog comes over. You see him do his work. This is work he's trained for, by the way. He's done lots of work with his handler. He gets the scent. Looks up at the handler and says, I got it, let's go. Off that dog goes. Through backyards, over fences, round whatever, looking everywhere, but that dog is on the scent. And then that dog finds the person that committed that offense that you're going to be charging with, cowering away somewhere. And the dog finds them, and you get the bad guy who might have otherwise have gotten away with this horrible crime. And you get to bring some closure to a family and to a child, and maybe get something done well that you just would not have been able to do without that police dog being present. I read that police dogs, have got 255 million scent sensors in their noses, compared to us humans. We only have about 5 million, and most of us, as you know, we don't think we can smell anything. We can't smell good wine or bad wine, but these dogs, they're just tremendous at what they're able to do. You know, and I talked to a copper that I know, and he confirmed this. He said, look, people just don't get what these police dogs do all the time. He told me about how they help to find missing people. The story of one Alzheimer's patient who got out in the dead of winter, went wandering away. No one knew where they were. The police were all over it. They brought in their command unit. They're searching, they're checking everything like you do. There's a whole process for doing it. They're not finding this person. The police dog finally gets on scene, does a little looking around, boom, hits on the senior citizen, finds them lying deep in the snow between a fence and a signpost, where the police had already walked by numerous times, but you wouldn't have looked there, you wouldn't have seen him, you wouldn't have known. And apparently they immediately got this person out, got them in an ambulance, got them to hospital. They were so close to death, he tells me, that they had to drain all the blood out of the person, warm it back up, and then put it back in slowly, because that person was that close to hypothermia and almost death. Saved because of this police dog. They tell me about missing children that go wandering off. And these dogs are trained. They help find these children before something horrible could happen to them. I remember a couple of years ago, I went to cover a call in the media. It was the middle of the winter, and it was one of those freezing cold nights, or days, I should say, I'm sorry. A freezing cold day, one of those ones where as soon as you got out of your car, you breathed in on your nose, and your nose, the skin just stuck together. When you stood out in the wind, you couldn't stand there for 30 seconds without the cold just biting at your face. You couldn't face into the wind. And in this horribly cold weather, a little over 12 months old, somehow got out of their apartment in the middle of the night and went wandering off. Well, there was no canines that were able to come to help save this child. And they found the child, believe it or not, 5 blocks away. I couldn't have walked 5 blocks in that cold weather. And this little toddler did it in a diaper, and they found the baby dead in a backyard. But I'm mindful that something like these police dogs might have been there at a time. They've saved countless people like that. People don't realize all that the different things that the dogs do. I mean, they do search and rescue, looking for people. There's cadaver dogs that also help to find people that may be buried in avalanches, or finding dead people who have been buried and hidden away when they've been murdered. They look for drugs, explosives, and guns, and they do tracking. And the one copper was telling me they like it. They got a car pulled over, it's suspicious, they're dealing with the person, and the canine shows up and it hits on the fact that there's probably a gun in the car. Well, isn't that lovely? Another gun off the road because of a police dog. And those guns, some of them, the automatics, the Glocks, they'll carry 18 bullets. How many lives were saved because this dog got that Glock off the road? These dogs are important pieces of equipment. Joe Warmington tells me he covered the story of the mass murderer, MacArthur, who was hunting down and taking gay people, setting them up on dating sites, taking them out, and then having horrific sex and dismembering the bodies and hiding them in different places. And he had killed so many people. It was a case that was befuddling. People didn't know what was happening. It took a while to figure out that men were disappearing. And the homicide squad and the chief of police in Toronto were taking a lot of heat as to why that problem, or why these cases weren't solved and why they weren't figured out. And I remember I covered that case for the media as well. And I remember talking to the lead detective on it, Hank Idzinga. Very, very good detective. I mean, if I had someone I wanted investigating a murder, someone I loved was killed, I'd certainly want Hank on the job doing it as opposed to anybody else. I mean, he's that good at doing it. And we talked about the challenges that he had in looking and solving this problem, because the body parts were spread out all over the place. This guy would take them and dismember them and hide them. And I can remember at one of the news conferences towards the end, Hank was there, and he had this other copper beside him, another detective, another homicide detective. And Hank is a big guy. He's a big guy. And this other copper next to him looked a little bit small. He looked a little bit all clean cut, and, he looked like he just could have been a rookie, although he wasn't. He looked like he could have been an accountant, although he wasn't. It turns out he was the homicide detective who had a nose for details. And he was the one putting together all the details on all these murders, putting together all the facts, all the victims, all the clues, doing all the work. This guy was one brilliant homicide detective, Dave Dickerson, or Dave Dixon was his name. I remember standing for days outside of this one house where it was suspected that many of the body parts of the different victims were going to be hidden by this mass killer as they were trying to solve the case. And down behind this one particular house was a massive ravine and a hill. And we'd go down there and you'd see all the forensic people, they're all out there and they're all digging and combing over this hill and trying to find bits of evidence and of body parts and whatever other different things there may be in order to try and bring closure to all these cases of all these missing men, all of these homicides. Well, this detective, David Dickinson, he'd been on for 18 years. He was key in solving and putting together the case that put this guy, Bruce McArthur, in jail for a long period of time. And apparently, one of the things for Dave when he was doing this case and he was working on it, he became very impressed by watching the cadaver dogs that were working. They were out there walking and going through and sniffing and going through the potted plants and through the house. And they would trigger on things and they'd use their nose and they'd work meticulously as they would go over different ground in a way that they were trained to do it. And these dogs started discovering all of the evidence. All of the evidence got turned up and was used by this detective to help put this man in jail. Well, this guy, Joe told me, this David Dickerson, he said this guy was probably the cop who was the hero in the end when he solved this, putting away this case that caused such stress for the city, this mass murderer who was going around dismembering bodies. And he remembered particularly that he came outside the courtroom or one time at a briefing, and he mentioned all of the victims by names, pronouncing all their names correctly, and there's some difficult names in there because there were ethnic people that were killed. But this guy did not miss a trick. And Joe said, I remember thinking this guy could go anywhere on this job that he wanted to. This was one bright cop who had just solved a major case. Where was he going to go? Well, surprise, surprise. You know where he wanted to go? To the canine unit. He asked to go to the canine unit. And off he went, and he got a job handling with a dog, working on the canine unit because he was so impressed by them, the way they did their work. You know, isn't that something? You don't know all the stories behind the handlers of some of these dogs, too. You know, I just have to wonder. I don't know this, and I don't want to put words or thoughts into the mouth of this detective, but I somehow get a sense after him having to deal with such horrific murder cases, particularly this McArthur case, you get to see how evil and vile some people can do and the things that they could do. That maybe he just wanted to be around someone a little bit better and have a partner like a police dog to be spending his time with as he went forward. That's a bit of my editorializing on that one, though. There's a lot of coppers that have lots of stories about their experiences with police dogs and the cases they've solved and the things that they've done. They're very well respected. And they are, certainly to the handlers, treated like family because they have these dogs in around their family. They're with them 24/7, so they're definitely family that way. They wear the blue, so they consider them as partners, not just as dogs. They realize that they're equipment, they realize that they're dogs. They're not treating them as if they're humans, but they are law enforcement officers as far as the most coppers that I talk to are concerned. So when they had their memorial for the dog, they gave the dog a procession when he had passed on from Toronto out to, I guess it was Guelph, they did it. A lot of the police departments came out and stood on bridges. They had their canine units there. Other coppers stood there. Other police departments sent their condolences. Other emergency service workers, police, and paramedics. They put on a show for it. They showed up. They participated. Condolences came in from all over. There's actually a condolence book you can sign down at police headquarters for this dog, Bingo. Bingo. Bingo was his name. And that dog had just a couple of years old. He'd only been in service for a while. He had already done some incredible things. He had already recovered at least one gun off the street himself. Who knows who that saved? And he most likely saved an officer's life when he gave his during this arrest. So one of the problems with this that I'm going to talk about, though, is the mayor of Toronto ghosted standing up and saluting this dog and partaking in recognizing the passing of this dog and what they did. And this is during a piece of time here in Toronto where we've had other police officers shot, others run over by cars, a woman killed on the streets not too long ago. I did a podcast about her. Crime is rampant throughout the streets, and the police were ghosted during the election by this Mayor Olivia Chow. Her and the party that she's affiliated with, the NDP, they have a distaste for police. They have obscenities for police. In fact, many of the members of the party that she's affiliated with. And Olivia Chow has a history of not liking the police. She was thrown off of a police board many years ago. And she just ghosted the police on this one. They wanted her out there to show support. But she lived up to her reputation and was a no-show and did not show up to recognize the service of this police dog. Well, let me tell you, the Toronto Police Service is not impressed. The Toronto Police Association is not impressed. She is not standing up for the police. When they were going out to arrest someone wanted for murder, another murder that had just occurred in her city just before that, and she ghosted all of this. She's offered no support. Well, I talked to the coppers when the election was coming up, and they were all worried that this woman was going to be elected because they know that she does not support the police. She can't bring herself to go on camera and say it. And it's, in my opinion, it's because she has so much of her self-worth built up in tearing down the police over the years with the crowd that she hangs out with. She talks about police being racist and terrible and defund them, and they're too violent and all the other different things that she thinks about the police. But it's her job as the mayor, the chief magistrate, to stand up for it. And boy, she showed her true colors by not showing up for this one. You know, I predicted this is going to be a long and violent summer in Toronto. It's already off to a heck of a great start. I saw some breaking news come in here about potentially an officer being shot just as I'm doing this call. Not in Toronto, but in Ontario. And the police, when they don't feel they're backed up by their chief and or by their mayor, it affects your life in your city. I remember going way back in the day when I was on the job, there was an issue where there was, of course, the racial tension of police being called racist all the time for doing things. And there was a case of a couple of coppers were downtown and they saw this black guy went up, knocked a woman down, stole her purse, and went off for a run. They caught the black guy. A scuffle was going on. A senior officer shows up on the scene and tells the two officers who had this man arrested and were going to charge him with assault and theft and robbery. The senior officer said, no. Take the cuffs off him. Give her purse back and let him go. Just let him go. Because he didn't want to start any racial incidents for actually arresting someone for the police who saw this crime. Well, let me tell you, word went around the whole department like wildfire that you're not going to be backed up now if you're doing something. If you're making arrests and there's any political side to it at all, you're not going to be backed up. You might find yourself charged. You might find yourself on the dirt list. You might find yourself like I knew one officer who, when he got involved in a political incident, they made him walk the beat on the roof of his police station in the winter. That's actually what they made him do, because they disowned him because of the political hot potato that officer was in. So when you have police that don't feel they're going to be backed up, those police are not going to go rushing in like that dog Bingo did to go and get the bad guys. That's not the way it happens at that point. You find yourself getting involved in a shootout with bad guys, and next thing you know, the mayor's calling you names and saying you're wrong and disowning you, which they've already more or less done, this mayor, before she's even taken office. It's her reputation. So I'm just putting this word out that you better be wary when you don't back up your cops. People who know me, and they know that I've covered the police for quite a period of time. I've gone down, I've done lots of interviews, lots of media on the police. I call the balls and strikes. If I think a cop has been out of line, they've done something out of line, I say it, I call it. But I have to tell you, most of the time it's the misinterpretation by the media and the public that they don't know how to tell what's going on. They honestly can't tell what you're trained to do, which is called a distraction blow. From, oh, the police was just beating him on camera. Oh, they were pounding him. And they go on about police abuse, and this goes on. When no, it's very clear to anybody who knows the training. These are what are called distraction punches. You got a guy in the ground. He's got his hands tucked underneath him so you can't handcuff him. He doesn't want to be arrested. So you start punching him in the ear because the ear is very sensitive and it hurts. You're not clocking him. You're punching him in the ear, because that hurts. And what happens then is his hand comes up to protect his ear. When his hand comes up, you grab the wrist, you twist the wrist, and now you have control and you put him in cuffs. It's not a police mindlessly beating someone. It's a technique of doing the hard job of arresting people who don't always want to be arrested. It's kind of like you don't want to see how your sausage is made sometime. People who complain about how the police arrest people when they've never had to try to arrest someone themselves, or gone through the training that the police will help you look at and see how difficult it is. As I said, I call balls and strikes on cops. They get it wrong, I'll say it. Most times they get it right. And it is going to cost the city the loss of this dog Bingo. Who knows how many other more years he could have gone on for doing that. And it's going to cost this mayor not standing up for the department and for the police dog. I'm mindful of another copper I talked to out in Durham region, just on the outside of Toronto. They've got a lot of crime themselves. And they tell me that the association went out there and they've already put up a massive memorial at their headquarters. And it was donated by a big concrete and granite company out here in Durham region, when they heard that it was going to be a memorial to the police dogs and their handlers. As the dogs pass on and die, their names get etched into the memorial out at their association, and their handlers there with it too. And there's a big engraving apparently of a German Shepherd's head on it. I'm going to go out first thing tomorrow and go have a look at this memorial. I'm going to go for a drive out and have a look at it. Because guess what? The companies and the people of Durham, they appreciate their police and their dogs and the service they do. They know nobody's perfect. Isn't everybody perfect all the time? But these are people and dogs that are doing all the serious work. They're putting their lives out on the line. In many cases, they're doing a lot of work. I watch one handler here. He trains his dog near where I am because there's a field and a area at space that's away from enough people so he can train the dog to track. And it's funny because everybody loves the police dogs. I talked to him about it. I wanted to go see his police dog. Hey, can I go look at your dog and all this? And that's what they get all the time. But they protect the dogs. They don't want people coming up to them all the time. He tells me that it's terrible. He says when they go out to do community relation work, people always ask, oh, can you bring the police dog out? He says we have to make sure that the dog is the last one in the room and the last one to go up. He says because as soon as the dogs come into the room, the people go crazy. They all love the dog. They forget everything else. You can't make another point because the people all so love these police dogs. You know, and I'm thankful for them. I'm thankful for their help and the service they give for the lives they've saved, for the Alzheimer's patients, for the children, for the wandering souls, for the guns they've taken off the streets, for the bad guys they've taken down who thought they were going to get away with a heinous crime, for the drugs they've taken off the street that would maybe go on to kill people in overdoses, the fentanyl, and all the people I know over the years who've told me they've lost loved ones to fentanyl and overdoses. These dogs are great. They are absolutely great, and I have a lot of respect for them. I think we should all have the respect for them. In any event, Bingo. B-I-N-G-O, and Bingo was his name. Drop a note to the Toronto Police on Twitter at TPS Operations. Maybe go down to headquarters and sign the condolence book. Or just let a copper know. Give a tip of the hat to them. Let them know that you appreciate them. This is Ross McLean for the McLean Chronicles.